Jim, this is a very special piece of uh, leather history and history just in general. Um, give me the breakdown of how you came. I guess just give me the Cliff Notes version of why this piece of leather is so expensive. Um, what it is, how you acquired it, and then maybe just what your ultimate goal for it and others in your collection is.
Sure, sure. Well, let me just kind of start out. Yes, there is a story connected with this. This piece of leatherwork that you're looking at here was um, found by a lady actually up in Missouri. She was in West Plains, Missouri. She and she's not a leather worker. She was visiting some secondhand store, thrift shops, and such. She was looking for some picture frames, and she walked into this one place, and there's a bunch of them stacked up against the wall. And so she's looking through them, and then the whole pile knocked over. And anyway, in there, she found this piece, this one frame that had this piece of leather in it. And I'm going to try to give you a little better view just to give you an idea of the size. So it's a pretty good sized piece of leather, and it was in there, and it's got this story written in there, and I'll share that with you in a second. But anyway, she got to looking at it closer, and she realized that hey, it's signed by this Ken Griffin guy, and not being a leather worker, she decided to try to figure out who this was or if this was important at all, and so she posted some pictures out on Facebook and said, anybody out there in the world of leatherworking that knows anything about this Ken Griffin guy, and anything. One thing led to another, and eventually she was pointed in my direction as being maybe the guy that could answer her questions. And so she sent me some pictures of it, and I looked at it and I said, yeah, that's a pretty interesting piece of leatherwork. I said, I think I know what it is, but and we ended up talking on the telephone, and I told her a bit of the history about who Ken Griffin was and some of his importance in the to the world of leatherworking, and even my little bit of shared history with him. I grew up in Miles City, Montana, or near there, and the Miles City Saddlery was one of those places known in the West for having some of the best saddle makers around. And at one time, back in the early 50s, Ken Griffin was the chief leather carver there for the Miles City Saddlery. So his leatherwork and the style of leatherwork that he did is basically what I saw when I grew up. It would have been this kind of leatherwork that was in and around my hometown that inspired me to want to dig into this stuff. So anyway, I shared all that with her, and she said, "Well, it sounds like that needs to come to your place." She said. So anyway, and we horse traded. She said, "I'll send it to you, and but I want some leather work from you." And so, and I haven't done it yet, but she sent me some. She sent me a first edition Harry Potter book, and she wants a leather cover made for it. So I'm gonna build her a leather cover for her first edition Harry Potter book. That's the trade, and that's kind of about next on my agenda as soon as I get this class out of the way. But anyway, so when I got the piece, I looked at it and I said, "Oh yeah, this is really what I thought it was." Um, so what caught my attention was the frame, the carving around the border of this. And again, I'll try not to get you sick here, but I want you to see that up the top there's that longhorn skull, and the floral around there is pretty classic. It's very old school Western floral carving. And so I went digging through my collection of old stuff, and sure enough, I found in my collection a copy of Ken Griffin's very first book. His very first book, it actually wasn't even a book. It was a pattern pack called The Art of Leather Carving by Ken Griffin. And if you notice that the envelope, it's some huge pages. They're probably all 3 feet by 3 feet, or maybe even larger when they fold out. But the floral carving around the edge of it's that pattern that's on this piece of leather. And I'll tell you what, I'm anal enough about this. I actually got in there and looked at the spacing on the mule's foot impressions and how sharp the curves were in the decorative cuts. This is that piece of leather. There's no question about it. So anyway, so how does that date it? Well, I'm flipping this over. There's actually a publication date on it, and I don't know if the camera will pick that up, but down here in the bottom, if I get it on camera, you might be able to see it, that this was copyrighted and published in 1949. So this piece of leather is at least from 1949. And obviously that was pretty exciting to come across that. Then I got to digging a little bit further, and the further I dug, the more I found some more stuff where that same art had been used. And so herein is why this ends up being maybe one of the more important pieces of leatherwork that I've got in my store, because it really represents kind of the beginning of the leathercraft industry. I don't know how much you know or folks know about the story of Tandy Leather, but they didn't start out as a leathercraft store. They started out actually as a shoe findings business. They were a partnership with a guy by the name of Hinckley. It was called Hinckley Tandy Leather Company for many years when they first started out. But in the late 40s, in fact, right around 1950, I can show you. They made the decision that the Tandy, that had been Charles Tandy and Dave Tandy. Charles was the son of Dave. They decided, this leathercraft thing looks like it's really going to take off. And I think what we're going to do, we're going to just kind of open some stores that are just dedicated to that. And Mr. Hinckley didn't want anything to do with that. So they kind of split their ways. And so what was Hinckley Tandy Leather Company became Tandy Leather Company. And so in 1950, they published their very first catalog. And so here is that very first catalog. And you can see it says Tandy Leather Company, successor to Hinckley Tandy Leather Company. At that point, they had 4 stores that were open. This catalog right here came out in 1950. So you're looking at the very first Tandy Leather catalog as when they were officially Tandy Leather Company. And look at what they used for art around the corners of that thing. They used this same piece of leather. In fact, that skull right there, or that bull right there in the middle, that's right dead center in the middle of this thing. So you're looking at a piece of leatherwork here that was used at the very beginning of the leathercraft industry, and it makes it a very significant piece of leatherwork. Now, the rest of the story on this, after we negotiated our deal, and the lady told me that she'd send it to me and I would do this piece of leatherwork in exchange for it. She said, "You want to know how much I actually paid for it?" She said it was $2.75.
Oh my gosh!
And so
in West Plains, Missouri, in a thrift store.
Yeah, in a thrift store, and I cannot tell you how it could have gotten there. Ken Griffin, to my knowledge, there was never any history where he ever lived or worked in that area. So this might have been something that was, handed down to the family or whatever. And well, in fact, it probably was, because it was in a thrift store. It was one step short of going to the dump. It was that close to disappearing from the world of leatherworking. But which would have been an absolute crying shame. The message that you see in the middle of it here, I'll get a little closer now. And again, I got my back to the camera, so if I'm not exactly on, you got to tell me. But anyway, there at the top it says Dear Mac. That Dear MC on there, that would have been Dick McGahan. Dick McGahan was the founder of Craftool Company. And if you read this thing, well, I'll just read it to you. It says, Dear Mac, I've been taking a look-see around the Southwest, traveling through California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. And in every saddle shop, I find stampers using and praising craft tools. I use mine every day, and no matter what the design, there is a craft tool to fit it. So I'm writing to tell you that they are the best stamping tools that money can buy, and that's no, and there's the bull, okay? And that's no bull. Yours truly, whooping it up for Craftools, Ken Griffin. This here, I think I've seen this in an advertising piece somewhere for Craftool Company, but I have not yet found a copy of it. But I think I have seen that. But the fact that I know that that's Ken, or that was Dick McGahan that he was writing that to, lets me dig a little bit deeper, and I'll just go a little bit further back with you into Ken Griffin's history with Craftool Company. I have another piece of really neat old stuff. In fact, I posted a picture of this out on it's on elktrackstudio.com, our website. I have I put a copy of the very first Craftool catalog, and this is it. This is the very first Craftool catalog. It was came out, and again, I'll try to show you here. But if you look down here, where we get here, there we go. If you look down here, you can see that this was published in 1947. So this catalog here came out in 1947, and the way they did this book, they used leather carvings from some of the great leather workers of the day. In fact, you'll see here kind of the list. There was some of the ones that people today might know would be like, well, Ken Griffin is in there, Al Shelton, F.O. Baird, Joey Smith. Those are some that people might have heard of before. But anyway, these pieces in here, like I said, they were tooled, and then in the center of each of these carvings, they stamped up the impression. So if you want to know what the original Craftools look like, what kind of impressions the very first original Craftools might have given you, this catalog here will do it. And like I said, that's out on Elk Track Studio. It's in the free patterns, and people can download a copy of this if you'd like to have that just for reference. So, but anyway, if you flip through here, you'll find, yep, Ken Griffin did that. In fact, you might have, if you've seen some of my leather work before, you've probably seen where I used that old cowboy on some things. He did the page that showed off the Vayner tools, and that goes back. This catalog right here was from 1947, and you know what? I actually have that piece of leather here too. This is that piece of leather from 1947 that was done by Ken Griffin. And so the history of Ken Griffin and Craftool goes back to the very earliest days of Craftool. And so to tell you a few more stories, and again, y'all, if you want to ask questions, you got to interrupt me because I'll just keep going on and on.
Well, I did want to bring something up real quick. So you know, it was very clear that on the piece we were talking about originally, that you know, elements of that were used in that first, you know, official Tandy Leather magazine.
Yeah.
And so with you know, the border and then the bull, is there a like documentation that was Ken Griffin that actually allowed them to use the elements from that advertisement in that magazine?
Well, he obviously did, because I've got the piece of leather, and again, I can compare the impressions and everything. There's no question that that's the right stuff. The fact that they used it, you know, I don't have any written documentation that he gave them,
right.
That, but Ken Griffin was doing his first books were published by Craftool Company. Eventually, Tandy Leather did buy Craftool Company. Now, they didn't at the time that this was being done, but they did, in fact, buy Craftool Company, and at some point. So all of that would become their they would have owned the copyrights for that stuff.
So I guess my question, you know, is there a, like, for all these, I haven't studied, you know, the greats as much as you have, obviously. But is there like a defining piece? Because you know, you mentioned that the border kind of is that very traditional Western style tooling. Is there something that defines Ken Griffin when you really break it down?
Well, yeah, a little bit. I mean, his style of work certainly, you can't throw it into one of these categories the way people want to today. You know, it's not a Sheridan style, it's not a Porter style, it's not anything like that. It was classic Western floral. It probably, if you were to study the style that he used, it has elements of the Porters in it. It has elements of California style as well. His history, just to tell you a little bit more about him, he actually was born, I believe it was in Kansas. He ended up, his first introduction to leatherworking was with a saddle maker out in New Mexico. He was in New Mexico working at that saddle shop when Howard Hughes was filming, I think it was called The Giants or something like that, out in New Mexico. And Ken Griffin hired on with him to manage his horses and stuff like that, their livestock. And when that filming was over, they invited him to go on out to California with them, which is how he got to California. He then, of course, was in California for quite a while. He worked, had his own shop there. That's where he would have gotten introduced to Craftool Company and folks like that. So his style of leatherwork, again, would have been an accumulation of all of the leatherworking that he had been exposed to. I can show you some Arizona stuff where this style of an oak leaf that you see right here, that's very much an Arizona style thing. And I've seen Ray Poya do this kind of stuff with the use of decorative cuts. But this flower and these scrolls, that's somebody else's work. And that, you're looking at someone who brought all of his collected knowledge, and then he put it down in a book. He put it into that first book, The Art of Leather Carving. His second one that came along was called Ken Griffin Scrapbook, and neither of those are still in publication today. But this is one of the guys. In fact, another long story or a short story. But anyway, there was another company out in Arizona. It was called. They produced some books and some stuff called Stylecraft. They ended up. The guy's name was Al Green that owned that. Anyway, they had a young fella that was just a brilliant artist that wanted to do a book. In fact, he did his first book with them. It was called Belts Galore, and it was done by Al Stolman.
Yeah.
And when they first started working with him, his leather work was just out of this world. It was beyond what anybody was doing at the time, right from the get-go. And we had at Tandy Leather, when I worked there, we had a fella working with us, Harry Riesinger, who used to work for Al Green. In fact, he used to work with Al Stolman when they were in the process of publishing those first books. They showed that stuff, and Al was, like I said, way the heck ahead of where the average leather worker was, and he was going to do, show people what he could do. And they said, you know how to tone this down a little bit. You got to be a little bit more deliberate. You got to do a better job of teaching with your stuff. And they said, here, take a look at what this guy is doing. And according to my buddy Harry Riesinger, who's deceased now, but according to him, they handed him a copy of Ken Griffin's scrapbook and said, "Here, you need to take a look at how this guy presents his information and see if that wouldn't be see what you can learn from it." So anyway, that's a hearsay story, but it came from a guy that supposedly worked with Al when he worked with Stockcraft. It was called Apache Leather, was the name of the company out there. Anyway.
Wow. Okay.
The whole story. They're long gone. They were eventually bought out by Craftool as well. So that's why those books eventually ended up being Craftool books as well.
So, is there it'd be really interesting to find that advertisement for Craftool and like an actual publication that's just to have it. That'd be really neat.
I have it somewhere. Again, I'd have to look. It might be. I don't know. I'd have to just go through a lot of the old leatherworking magazines or some of the old Doodle Pages and see what I can find. Speaking of Doodle Pages, and this here's one other connection I want to make for you about Ken Griffin and Craftool Company. And well, I can make several connections there, but I have a copy of a letter. And this is here, I can document. In 1946, Ken Griffin got a letter from Dick McGahan, and the letter I have here, and it says, "Kenny," he says, "yes, I like your doodle page idea, but why can't we call it something a little more classy? Doodle sounds like sounds sort of silly or frivolous. Maybe we could combine it with the Craftool name. Why can't you do one and get the thing started? When can you do a couple or at least one to get the thing started? Here's $100 for the first one, including your idea." The idea for for Doodle Pages originated with Ken Griffin.
Oh,
And right here's the letter from Dick McGahan, or a copy of the letter to Dick McGahan, from Dick McGahan to Ken Griffin, telling him, yeah, go ahead with this this Doodle Page idea. It seems like a good idea. So their relationship goes back quite a ways. Um, Another story I actually have somewhere. Well, I know where it's at, but I have a little bit of a biography that was written about Ken by Roberta Griffin, and she in that she was talking about their time out in California, and one of the stories in there was that he had a shop out there. He was building belts, washing. I don't know what it was, but they had a pretty good little business going, doing custom work out in Los Angeles. And Ken, I guess, was just an incredibly anal sort of a leather worker. I mean, he had to have everything just laid out right. He had everything, organized on his bench, and so everything had a place for everything, and everything was in its place. And yeah, in fact, when he would go to lunch, he would lay out his tools, perfectly lined up and all of that, so that he'd come back and just jump right back into where he was at. And anyway, he'd come back one day, and it was pretty obvious somebody had been messing with his tools, and he that just drove him nuts. They were all there; nobody had stole anything, but they weren't where he had left them, and so. He decided, well, I'm gonna figure out what's going on here. So he one day at noon, he laid out his tools and everything, but instead of going to lunch, he went and hid out in the closet or something like that was right there. And wasn't too long, in walks Dick McGahan, and he pulls out, Dick McGahan, again, the founder of Craftool Company, and he pulls out of his pocket a piece of cased leather in a bag, and he proceeds to use Ken's tools and stamp all those impressions into his piece of leather. And so at that point, Ken comes out of the closet and says, "What now?" Whatever. Basically it hit the fan, and want to know what he was doing, and so forth. And McGahan said, "Whoa, wait." He said, did not, trying to do anything here, improper, but these Craftools are taking off, and we need some new designs, and well, your tools work, and so we need some patterns for some new tools." And Ken said, "Well, why didn't you ask? You can use them, no problem." And the story was that after that, McGahan would come in and borrow Ken's tools, get the impressions and such, and those became kind of the masters for what ended up being a lot of Craftool companies' tools. And I guess that story is that McGahan would give him 15 or 20 of each of these new tools, when they come out, off of Ken's designs, and Ken would basically just sell them off for beer money or cigarettes or whatever, because hurt his own tools, the ones that he had made, so.
Yeah. So at that time, was majority of saddle makers and carvers, were they using like tools that they made?
Well, early on, of course, that's how they were done.
So I mean, at this time, was Craftool kind of the first?
Well, they weren't the first. They were certainly one of the early mass producers of stamping tools, and I can tell you some more stories about that. But there were other tool companies out there. Macmillan was around for a long time building tools. Ray Hackbarth was building tools for the saddle makers over in Phoenix, Arizona. But a lot of those guys, again, were building their own tools because, well, they had to. It wasn't like there was a Tandy store down at the corner or Springfield Leather or wherever you choose to shop today. You sure couldn't go on the internet and just order one off of Amazon. If you wanted a tool to do something that you weren't able to do, well, you're going to have to figure it out. You're going to have to build something that'll do what you want it to do, or whatever. And that's where a lot of the tool designs that we have today came from, was from the hands of saddle makers or leather stampers that needed something in particular, and necessity they say is the mother of invention. And so they
Yeah.
went ahead and built what they needed so that they could do what they wanted to do.
And it's funny because in a lot of different hobbies that I've come across in my years, which is a lot, um, it's always there's always a tool for them, and it's even now I still find myself having to create different tools for different things when when I'm carving or making something. And um, it's this very kind of never before have I seen a hobby where you have to make your own tools to do something specific as much as leather.
Well, I think I would disagree just a little bit with that. I think there's no question there's more tools and more equipment available today than there's ever been in the history of leatherwork. There you can, if there's a tool that you need, there's probably somebody out there making it, and it's readily available too. And in fact, I think this is a personal beat, but I think one of the things, because like I said, I think necessity is the mother of invention. Because we are not needing to be creative because we can go buy it, I think we have lost some creativity as a result of that. And I think people find that it drives me nuts when I do my pattern packs. I have quite a few pattern packs out on my website, and I deliberately do not put tool numbers in there because people, I've had people in classes, I'll be stamping something and show them, okay, here, we're going to use a bevel and we're going to do this. And people want to know, okay, what's the number of the one you're using? Well, I didn't look before I grabbed it. I'm using the one that fits the job that I'm going to do. But I've had people then in those classes say, well, I can't do that because I don't have that tool. Well, that's just wrong. That right there is not the level of creativity and ingenuity that we need to drive our craft forward. We need people to look at things and look at their tools and decide, hey, I got something that'll do something similar to that. Let me try that,
Yeah.
And that's where we see new and innovative ideas coming forth. So like I said, that's why I don't like to put tool numbers in there. A lot of the tools I use are old craft tools. I mean, I don't use the latest, greatest things. I did one of the things, I guess I could do this real quick since it's right here close by, but let me just show you here. I have a few tools. Here's one little set of tools that I have here. This is a box that once belonged to Dick McGahan. To Dick Giehl. Dick Giehl was an Al Stolman Award winner. This was his toolbox. These tools that you see right here are all original Craftools. The story about Craftools is that after Tandy bought them, they still stayed out in California until about around 1960, I think. Then they moved that company to Fort Worth, thereabouts. And then in 1963, they started putting letters in front of the numbers, like a V for a veiner and a P for a pear shader and so forth. And so that's how they got started. And this here is a set of original Craftools before they put the letters in front of them. They started doing that in '63. In fact, wait a minute, that's not all of them. Here's the rest of those tools. This is another set that I have. These are also old original Craftools. This here, I don't know if you've ever heard of RBS tools. This might be the largest collection of RBS tools that exist. Most people don't know much about them. I don't know much about them. Ray Hackbarth made a lot of tools. These are the ones that you'd have seen come out of Arizona, and so forth. And these aren't even the ones I use. Over here's the ones that I use. This is my workbench over here. These are, just a whole collection of different things from everybody, Craftool and Barry King and everybody that that makes tools. So that's what we got. So
Wow.
goodness gracious, if I can't do something that I want to do with the tools that I've got, the problem isn't my tools. The problem is me and the fact that I am not being as using the creativeness that our the folks that came before us had to use. And so
Sure.
anyway.
I could see that, and I think that's very, very important because, I mean, describe, if Ken Griffin was sitting down and this is a blank, blank piece of leather in front of him, describe kind of the process of where he acquired that leather, and then what tools he used to make this in 1949 or thereabouts.
Yeah, hang on a second. I'm grab something else. Um, Okay, sorry for the delay, but I had to grab a couple more examples to show you a little bit more about it. So what would Ken Griffin have done? I don't know what he would have done. He lived and died before I ever got involved with leatherwork. I did get to know his son. His son is still alive. His son's name is Dennis Griffin. He lives out in Northern California. In fact, I spent a couple of days with him. We spent a night at his house. Talk to him about his father and the legacy behind his. In fact, Dennis actually graduated from the same high school that I did. So we had a few stories that we could share about people we knew and families that were still around and so forth. So I got to know him quite well. He actually has this piece of leatherwork hanging on his wall in his shop. This is the piece of leatherwork. This is that other book that Ken Griffin did. This was Ken Griffin's scrapbook. And this piece of leather is actually hanging on his wall. And in fact, it has my business card on the back of it right now. And so he said, basically, if my kids don't want this, when something happens to me, he said, I'll make sure it gets sent to you. So hopefully we can make sure that that piece of leather continues to survive. But one of the things we talked about, he said, yeah, that's Dad. That's the way Dad always thought of himself. He thought of himself as a cowboy leather worker, cowboy saddle maker, that's kind of how he pictured himself. And in fact, he said he used to carry around his tools in that little cup that you see there. That you're by his stump. You got this little cup of tools. That he had actually a leather cup that he carried all of his tools around with him. And this here, and a few years later, I had an opportunity to acquire that cup of tools.
Oh, wow.
That is actually Ken Griffin's toolbox. Not only that, that's actually Ken Griffin's tools. So if you want to know what he would have used, I can tell you exactly what he would have used because I have them right here. A lot of these, there are some of these that are modified. There are some of these that are Macmillan. Some of them are early Craftool. Some of them are hack bar. There's just a variety of things. He certainly wasn't loyal to any one toolmaker. And like I said, there's quite a few of these that are modified. He stamped the initial K on quite a few of those. But there's some of these in here that, there's one there. That's just made out of a nail. But yeah, so there's some homemade tools in here and so forth. So when you ask, what would he have used or how would that's pretty good question.
You right here, you reach into your bag of tricks and you pull out, well, this is what he used.
Yeah, and so anyway, I didn't have this at the time I was visiting with his son. But I do have the documentation on where that bunch of tools came from. Those tools and a number of other leather pieces that I have beyond what you see here, they were sold when Ken Griffin died. His wife, Roberta Griffin, took those tools and actually I have all of his saddle making tools and everything else too. She took them to the Autry Museum out there and wanted to sell them to the museum. And there's a guy by the name of James Notting, I believe it was. He was the director of the Autry Museum at the time, and he bought them. He bought them personally. And later on, he ended up over in Indiana and as the executive director of the Idlegeorge Museum, and which is probably the premier Western art museum in the country. And anyway, while he was there, he got to know a friend of mine by the name of John Kelly. John Kelly is a very avid leather worker and a very a student of it as well. I mean, a student of the history of it as much as anyone. And anyway, they got to know each other and they were talking and James Notting said, I got these tools. I ought to do something with them. They're in my collection, but they probably ought to go somewhere. So anyway, one thing led to another and John bought them from him. And the next year at Sheridan, he pulled me. I walked by. I got there a little bit late, and he was in a class there, and he saw me walk by, and he's Jim, come here, you know. And so I go in there, and he said, "I'll bet. Do you know what this is?" And he holds this up, and I said, "No, that's not what I think it is." And then he pulls it off, and he shows me. That tells me the whole story. And I called him several names. Anyway,
Wow.
he knew that my interest and connection with Ken Griffin, and he a year or two later he went ahead and sold them to me. So I have that collection, all that stuff, and I have the documentation or the letter of what provenance from James Notting as to how he got a hold of them and so forth. So there's no question that what I've got here is those tools that you see here on this book right here. A great book. So
Wow. So what would you say, describe that physical piece of leather right there? How thick is it? What type? I mean, it's obviously a veg
I don't
tan.
know. Probably, I think most of the stuff he carved on would have been pretty heavy. I've got other stuff. It's typically going to be 8, 9, 10, or even on up to saddle skirting type weight. I do have his wife's handbag. This is Roberta's handbag here, made by Ken Griffin, and there's her name in there.
Wow.
But anyway, so obviously he worked with some lighter weight stuff, but even this is probably 6, 7 ounce or so. But again, it's that classic style, classic Ken Griffin style of work that you see there.
So to get that look, I mean, they didn't. I mean, they didn't have all the finishes that we have nowadays. They didn't. So what did he? Obviously, some of that is patina. I imagine there would be some neat's foot oil involved in some way.
And I don't know what kind of care this has had. This piece here, when I got it, it was still in the frame that she got it in, and it was under glass, which is there. And if you look close enough, you can see a little bit of discoloration in here. And I think that's probably because moisture would have gotten in there at some point and did that. But I've hand rubbed a couple of layers of something akin to Lexol. It wasn't Lexol by name. It was another leather cream kind of product. I think it's some stuff I got out of Italy. But anyway, I hand rubbed a couple of that, and it still absorbed it just fine. It didn't discolor it or anything like that. And so it did. This piece here obviously has been not kept in nearly as good a shape. It's a lot stiffer, a lot rougher. I don't know what he would have done. More than likely, it might have been just oiled at one time. I mean, this is the kind of patina you get on an old saddle when it's not being used and it's starting to dry out, so that probably was just oiled. The kind of finishes that he would have used, I think he probably would have just oiled stuff. Neat lac would have been around. They'd have used something like a neat lac, the original lacquer type finishes. They'd have probably used that on some of the stuff. But it's kind of hard to say. How far back we talking? That this one piece I have here was 1947. So sorry, I wasn't around then.
So they would they have had something akin to like an antiquing cream or gel?
I don't think so. I think antiques are actually a later invention. I remember when Tandy Leather first started carrying them, it wasn't the stuff that Phoebe's makes even. It was something that they come up with. It's called Early American Antique. And it was the idea behind antiques. And I know this. I ran Tandy Leather stores for quite a few years. And I had samples up on the wall, things that I'd carved, showing off people what they could do and everything. And it was not uncommon to have somebody come in and say, "Oh, that's beautiful." I said, "What dye did you use to get that?" Well, back then I was using, for the most part, I would maybe use some old Omega dye to dye the background with a paintbrush, and then I would hit it with neat lac, and that was pretty much my day in, day out way I finished things. But as stuff is exposed to sunlight and to weather and such like that, it develops a patina that's all its own. and
Right.
engines were developed to try to duplicate that, to find a way to make stuff look older and more used, and so that's kind of a later invention. And then of
Mhm.
course all the stuff with the resist finishes and things like that have come along. That's an evolution that's happened.
So probably more than likely, the only thing that he would have used to finish this would be some sort of probably a neat to put oil or some sort of oil to give it that look.
Probably, but again, it's hard to say.
Yeah, sure. But I mean, just
But
the
that's typical
detail.
of what leather workers would have been doing back in those days. They would have probably oiled something. They might have used a dye on it. They would have probably maybe used some kind of a lacquer finish, but those kind of things were pretty much it. It was for the most part. Today, we're all about making stuff a lot prettier than they were. They were a little bit more concerned about making it functional, making it
Yeah.
so that would last and wear and so forth. As far as leather and such that he would have used, it's hard to say. I remember hearing a story about Porter Saddlery. Um, uh, Golly, I could never remember the guy's name. But there's a young saddle maker, or a wannabe saddle maker, I guess, that went to into Porter's one time, and with the ambition that he was going to be their up and coming leather carver, and he was crowing about um, how great a job he could do for him, and so they tried him out, and he ended up showing that he didn't know squat, basically, and but they didn't run him off. They put him to work there in the saddlery, and his job was taking the hides that come in, his first job, and cleaning them up, because back then, leather didn't come in nice cardboard boxes or shrink wrapped on a pallet or any of that kind of stuff.
Okay.
They came by rail car. And his job, they would unload them, and who knows what else was in that rail car. They surely weren't airtight or anything like that. So he had to take those hides out, clean them up, and get them ready for the real saddle makers. And um, anyway, um, the thing about it is that those guys, were craftsmen. They had to take whatever they had and turn it into a usable product. Saddles that today people, wish they had in their collection, those pieces like that. But they did what they didn't get to do is they didn't get to whine that, oh gosh, this here's got a brand on it, or there's a scar over here, or it's
Oh man,
somebody
yeah,
somebody's footprint is on it. You know
yeah,
what? It's what you got. And
yeah,
if we still got a saddle, we got to get built. And we can't leather kit didn't come in like in a week's time from when you ordered it.
sure,
It probably was months
yeah,
out before you could get more in. So the idea of complaining and putting off doing it and blaming the leather, which people tend to do these days, instead of their own lack of creativity and not lack of knowledge. Um, anyway, that would have been the world that Ken Griffin learned to do leather work in.
well, my dad always said that a poor craftsman and a poor golfer always blames their tools.
Yeah,
So, but not like what's fascinating is um, the fact that, like you said, you worked with what you had, and the amount of detail and I mean that bull, the cuts on that bull, and he's not using I mean that's all just traced, unscratched.
I've got his swivel knife.
Wow.
It's got a half-inch wide blade in it. Um,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Wow.
I had that, and it wasn't anything fancy. It was one of the adjustable Craftool ones. It wasn't anything
Yeah.
fancy. Um,
Huh. But I mean, just the cuts alone on that thing are just precise and just so clean and just so. I mean, his his beveling is just fantastic, and
yeah, but again, it's, I guess attention to detail and being more concerned about the results you're producing than what tool you're using to get there. I
sure.
think that sometimes we get distracted. I you you go out on the internet today and ask the question, what's the best swivel knife to buy? Or whose tools should I be investing in? And oh my gosh, you're going to get so many comments about, oh, you can't do it right unless you get this or that or whatever, you know, and some of the most misleading information somebody aspiring to do leather work could ever get, because it doesn't depend on your tools. It doesn't depend on whose name is on the tools you're using. It depends on how much experience the hands using those tools have. And that's the thing that people, I go out to these leather shows, I go to all of them, and one of my classes that I teach, that's usually a sold out class, is on swivel knife finesse. And I will often take somebody's beginner's swivel knife, Craftool one, and I'll do my work with theirs, because I want people to know that, you know, it isn't, and I've got knives, holy smokes, I didn't show you that. I've got, last time I looked, I've got over 130 unique different swivel knives. I've got swivel knives from everybody I think that's ever made a swivel knife. Wow. I've got all kinds of blades, I've got all of that. And, but you know, the last thing I would want to do whenever I teach a class like that is to pull out some highfalutin knife or tool or something that I might have the one and only of. And I have a lot of one and onlys that were ever made on some things. But the last thing I'd want to do is show people that here's what I can do with this, and you can't because you don't have it. You know? And that's kind of what comes across when people ask those questions. You know, they want to know, can I do leather work? What do I got to have? And they want to say, you know, well, if you don't invest and you don't spend a lot of money doing this, you know, you're not ever going to have success. And that's just the wrong message. It makes me nuts if you can't tell. But it's untrue.
You know, before I could, when I first started, I didn't want to buy a swivel knife because I was like, I don't know if I'm going to like tooling or not. And so one of my first pieces I did with just an X-Acto knife, and I just had a thicker blade on a cheap Amazon X-Acto knife and carved this pattern, and I made it work. And I still have that piece, and I'm really kind of proud of the fact that I did it with an X-Acto knife. But you know, it's one of those things where you certainly see the craftsmanship, especially when you appreciate that's what he had to work with back then. And then you see the tools, and then you see the swivel knife he had, and then you see, you know, all these things that it's not about the tools, it's about the vision and the person behind them.
Absolutely. I'm going to show you one more piece that proves that point to you. This piece is up on the wall here, so I got to move the camera. But up here above my refrigerator, I've got probably one of the strangest looking pieces of leatherwork in the shop. I don't know if you can see it. It's nothing I would ever do. It's just totally different than any style that I would ever contemplate trying to do. But this piece of leatherwork that you're looking at there came from Russia. And the way I have it is there's a gal here in, I think it was in 2007 maybe, the Leather International Federation of Leather Guilds had a show here in Fort Worth, Texas. And this lady brought this piece and a couple others with over from Israel. She was living in Israel, and so and she wanted me to have this piece. And I said, well, tell me about it. I said, that is just so different than anything we do here. Tell me about that piece of leatherwork. And she said, well, you know, a friend of mine from Russia did it. He was an immigrant to Israel from Russia, and you know, we got to know each other. And I found out he does leatherwork, and so we got to talking. And I said, well, you know, your stuff is so different than what we do. Tell me, how do you do it? And he said, well, we have cowhide, you know, and it's tanned in a special way so that, you know, you can put designs and such on it. But it's just cowhide. And she said, well, how do you do it? And she said, well, we get the outline on there. We kind of, you know, get it sketched onto the leather. And then we take a knife and we cut it into the leather. And so she pulls out her swivel knife. And she says, you mean like this? And he says, oh, no. And he pulls out his pocket knife. This here is chip carved. This is whittled out of a piece of leather. This is stuff cut away to do it. Well, you know what? He never had an Al Stolman book in Russia. He never had a Tandy store to go to. He never had a leatherworking class from Jim Linnell. He went about having an idea, and then he pursued it, and he did it with what he had available. That right and is a vision and an inspiration that came from within him. And you know what? We need more of that.
Yeah,
We need
that
more of
is,
that. That's what's going to drive this craft to where it's never been before.
wow, that is incredible. Well, that is very true testament to the fact that the tools don't make the craftsman.